Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, Göteborg you should say in Swedish, to revisit one of probably the best known Swedish craft breweries these days. So this beer was released on the 1st of September 2019 if I remember correctly, and this one is a new version of a beer that they've done a couple of times from what I gather. So for this review we are going to go back to Stigbergets Bryggeri and we're having a taste of the new version of the Lumor, which is an Imperial Double IPA coming in at 9%. So really curious to see how this one turns out. Stigbergets of course are very well known for the likes of the Muddle, the Amazing Haze, the original GBG Beer Week, now called the new and improved GBG Beer Week, and hopefully this is another good IPA from these guys. This style of course is what the brewery are particularly known for. So very curious to see how this one turns out, and as always I hope you guys enjoy my take on this beer. So anyway, as is usual with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Stigbergets before. I think there's about 15 or so there, and I'm sure there'll be more in the near future. There's all the usual social media. If you want to see more beer reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the home page and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity, and as always please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to the brewery notes then, to tell you a little bit about Stigbergets Bryggeri once again. So as I've told you many a time before, Stigbergets Bryggeri are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, and they were founded by Nils Hultkrantz and Richard Simonsson. And these guys own two bars that share the one kitchen. This is Bar Kino and the Hagbjörns Cafe, which can be found on Linnegatan in the city. And these both opened back in 2007. So originally the idea was to brew a few beers that they could sell in the bars, but this led to them kegging the beers and then selling them to other pubs. And eventually they started bottling the beers that they were brewing back in November of 2014. But their original beers were mainly English and German styles, but of course more recently they've expanded into the more hoppy American styles of beer. The original head brewer was Ole Andersson, who is also the co-owner of OO Brewing. He was replaced when he left to focus full time on OO Brewing by Barnaby Struve, who was one of the vice presidents at Three Floyds, and he stayed with them for a short period of time as well. Quite recently, I think at the end of 2018, they opened up a new brewery at Partihalarna, which is where they brew 5,000 litre batches at a time, and they're also working on some sour beers now as well, which they started to release at the beginning of 2019, end of 2018 if I remember correctly. But they also started selling their beers in these 440ml cans as well, and this means that they're able to export a lot more of their beers as well. The current brew team is Ollie Banks, who used to work for Beavertown in London, a very good brewery in their day, and also Lucas Monroyd, who used to work for All In Brewing, one of the many gypsy breweries around Gothenburg. But like I said to you, these guys, particularly known for the IPA style, you know, the hazy New England sort of things. Their sour beers that they're coming out with tend to be pretty decent as well, and you will on occasion find like imperial stouts and stuff like that from these guys too, and pretty much when these guys have a go at another style they tend to do it quite well, but I do wish they would do it a little bit more often. That's not to say anything against their IPAs of course, it just would be quite cool to see a few more different styles and things like that from these guys. But my favourite beers that I've had from them so far, Amazing Haze, you know, that's a bit of a nostalgia beer, one of the really kind of prominent New England IPAs in Sweden, and they did a Scotch ale which was really nice as well. The Muddle was a very good beer too, and I would recommend that you check out OO Brewing as well, because Ole Andersson, you know, very well regarded brewer actually, so do make sure you check him out. But yeah, that's all you really need to know about Stigbergets Bryggeri for the moment. Do try out some of their beers if you get the chance, and they're quite widely available throughout Europe. I'm not sure about how available they are further afield than that, but if you get the chance to try them, I would recommend that you do take a look at them. So yeah, let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer then. So as I mentioned to you at the start of the video, this one is a 9% Imperial IPA, they're calling it on the back there, and this is a new version of a beer that they've done a couple of times. The original one was in a bottle and it had a sort of pinkish label if I remember correctly, but I don't think that that was one that was available through Systembolaget, or if it was when I wasn't in Sweden actually, so kind of not sure about that. But this is the new 2019 version of the Lumor IPA, but as I say, 9% Imperial IPA, so without further ado, let's get it out and get on with the tasting. Just have a little look at that artwork there. That's a little bit, it's almost a little bit, it looks a little bit like some of these cell cultures you'll see in a microscope and things like that, which is kind of weird. Like the cell cultures have got teeth and a nose, and it's like a weird cell culture based face actually. It's kind of interesting that. But yeah, let's get it out and we will get on with the tasting then. I'm curious to see how this one turns out. I'm sure that I've seen this on tap a few times actually. The thing is, one of the downsides to Systembolaget is that and it's changed a little bit now because the Swedish breweries can release their beers every month, but it takes them quite a little bit of time actually to get a beer. Like they used to have to plan a year in advance to actually get one of their beers into Systembolaget, so it was a bit troublesome for breweries to actually get things out there. But since 2019, or was it before that? Since this year at least, there's a Swedish beer release every month, and you'll get some Norwegian and Danish stuff in that as well. But mainly, the idea behind this release is to let the Swedish breweries have a bit more easy access to the market. So on the first of every month, they can get their beers out there, unless of course that falls on a weekend. But it's great because we get more different Swedish beers rather than having to rely on small partiers or quarterly releases as it used to be. But yeah, so as you can see with this one actually, this one, I wonder if this might be a West Coast IPA, because if you look at it, it is actually quite clear compared to some of the other ones that you're going to come across from Stigbergets, of course. And I didn't have this beer in the fridge for too long, so I don't think it would have sedimented very much. We'll find out a bit later on, but this does look a little bit more like a West Coast IPA. A lovely, quite bright yellow colour. There's about a quarter finger of a frothy white head on this one, but that's fading away to be a very thin, foamy layer. It is higher in alcohol, of course, so the head won't have quite as much retention. One or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, and a few little ones heading up towards the bottom of that head there. But you know, overall, it looks kind of like you would expect for an IPA. It's just a bit strange to pour a Stigbergets one where it's not hazy as hell. But not complaining about that. I have been missing my West Coast IPAs, so curious to see how it turns out. The other thing to note about this is that Stigbergets do have a West Coast IPA, and I made the mistake when I reviewed that of thinking it meant West Coast American, where it really meant West Coast Swedish. So there seems to almost be a little bit of a kind of sub-style of Swedish West Coast IPAs, and that's not surprising when you consider how many breweries there actually are in Gothenburg. So this one, we'll need to comment on that a little bit when we try it, but nothing overly surprising about this beer. If I stick my fingers behind the glass, I think you'll be able to see there is a degree of transparency to this beer, but it's definitely not as hazy as you'll get from like Amazing Haze and Muddle and stuff like that. So yeah, let's take a closer look at the aroma then and see how we get on. Ooh, that's interesting. You can. This is not the most prominent aroma you're going to find from Stigbergets. I'll say that straight away. It doesn't jump out the glass at you, but it does have it. You can smell it. It's a bit boozier as well. I mean, the malt base. I suspect there is a little bit. It says on the back here there's only corn malt, so I'm guessing it might just be a. You know, it won't have any oats or anything like that added to it, but you can definitely smell a little bit of breadiness in there. There's a good little bit of biscuity note coming out of this one. I don't think it's quite sweet and oily enough to be caramel. I think it is more kind of pale malty and biscuity, to be honest with you. It's quite a light, straight up malt base, but the booziness that's in there, when you have alcohol, it will always give you like a kind of almost corny, slightly biscuity flavour, to be honest. So you can really... you know, you can really pick that out in the malt base here. On the hoppy side of things, I mean, there's a good bit of a kind of floral note. I would say that it leans more towards the grassy side of things in terms of the green side of the hops, but the fruitiness, there's quite a little bit going on there. I mean, I always like to play guess the hops with these beers, and I suspect that this one might have mosaic in it. It definitely has a bit of that kind of tangerine-y, orangey note. There is a little bit of a tropical quality in there. I don't think it's Galaxy though. It could be Mosaic and Simcoe that's in this, because there is a wee bit of that passion fruit, but it's not quite as complex as you would get from Galaxy, right enough, because you would get pineapple and stuff in that in this. So for me, there's a little bit of passion fruit in there, maybe a little touch of like mango or something like that, and a bit of an apricot-y kind of note to the beer as well. But mainly it's a kind of, to me, there's something in my head that's just saying that this is Mosaic. I think there's a bit of a tangerine orange to this one, a little bit of a kind of apricot-y note, and a wee bit of passion fruit too. It's you know, it's quite nice smelling. I mean, on the back end, you can pick up, there is a little bit of a kind of blueberry-ish note to that, and I always find that's one of the complexities you can get with Mosaic as well. That tends to come out in the flavour a little bit more in the aroma, but to me there is just a little touch of a berryish note coming out of this beer. But compared to other Stigbergets ones, I don't think the aroma on this one is quite as punchy as some of the ones that you're going to come across, but that's not to say that it's not going to be a good beer. So yeah, I think this one, actually, now that I think about it, this could well be the strongest IPA that I've had from Stigbergets in terms of alcohol content too. So yeah, we'll just need to have a taste of it and see how we get on. So yeah, take a little bit of time and enjoy the aroma of this one. Definitely smells like a kind of straight up IPA this, so I'm really curious to see how it turns out. But then the other thing to think about is that it will do, because if it's one of their older beers and they've changed the recipe a little bit, it might be a little bit kind of old school, if you like. But let's have a taste of this one then and just see how we get on. This is the new version of the Lumor, so we'll call it Lumor 2019. From Stigbergets Bryggeri up in Gothenburg here in Sweden, an Imperial IPA at 9%. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål. Yeah, that's good actually. I think to describe this beer, it is definitely, the first impression of this one is, it is a little bit more West Coasty in terms of its flavour, but it definitely sticks to that kind of New England level of bitterness. It's not, I mean, and I guess, I don't know whether it's right to say that that sort of approach is what you would get from a Swedish West Coast IPA, to be honest with you. That's an interesting point. It is quite similar to some of the other ones that you would come across. I mean, I've had a triple IPA from Stigbergets before. I had that at it's not Himeriet, it's the other one in Copenhagen. But I had a triple IPA from Stigbergets, and it you know, it blew the head off you. It was crazy. It was 11% or something. And this beer actually really reminds me of that actually. It really is quite nice. That it's quite easy to drink for a 9% double IPA, and that's not surprising because Stigbergets, you know, they do focus on drinkability. But this one gets a thumbs up for me. I do like this. It's definitely, as I say, more West Coast in its flavour profile, but more like a New England beer in terms of its level of bitterness and fruitiness and things like that. Yeah, that's good. I like how this one goes together. It's definitely a sipper though. You don't want to session these. I mean, some Swedish people might do that because Swedes can get a little bit crazy when they get a beer, which is quite funny to watch. So I could see a couple of people that are really beer enthusiasts kind of enjoying a couple of these in a night. But to me, this is like a sort of one-time drinking beer. This I like this though. They've done a good job of it, and you know, it's an IPA at Stigbergets. You know, it's not a surprise. So yeah, let's describe the flavour a little bit better then. So straight away, you'll feel that you can feel a bit of the pale malty quality blanket in the middle of your tongue. The malt base in this beer actually feels very, very light, to be honest with you, and for a 9%er, it's quite a feat to get away with that in the brewing, to be honest with you, because it doesn't feel overly boozy or anything like that. You will get a little bit of warmth in your chest at this alcohol percentage, that's not a surprise, but you really can pick up a little bit of that in this beer. The way the malt base goes together though is really nice. Pale malty base. On top of that, it really comes across as mainly biscuity, a little bit like McVitie's digestives. I keep using that descriptor. I don't know whether that's good for Swedes, because I can't say I've seen. I think you do get McVitie's digestives here. Well, I'm telling lies actually, because I ate them. I actually ate them before I went to Asian stuff. So yeah, McVitie's digestive biscuits and the malt base, that kind of dominates it. You can feel in the very centre of the palate that it's got quite a nice kind of more bigger bolder, boozy note to it, if that makes sense. You can feel the alcohol coming out of this beer in the very centre of your palate. The malt base though really isn't very complex. You're not getting like woody or nutty undertones or anything. It's very kind of straight edged, but in fairness, I think Stigbergets have always been like that. Like the West Coast IPA was very much like that as well. Pale malt, little bit of biscuit and things. You know, it's a very straight up malt base. It's not overly complex. So yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate, there's a teeny little bit of earthiness in this one, but not enough really. I was thinking there might have been mosaic from the aroma in this, but there's not that kind of earthy quality that you'd normally expect from mosaic, so now I'm doubting myself on that. I always like to play guess the hops with these beers, but yeah, there's a teeny little bit of earthiness in there. It's a little bit more noble in terms of its hoppy qualities, German noble kind of earthiness, but as you come further forward along the sides of the tongue, it spreads forward a little bit. You get some nice floral aromaticity coming towards the front corners of the tongue, and then around the very front curve of the palate it's a little bit lighter and more grassy and things like this, but it's not going to blow the head off you in terms of bitterness. We'll talk about that later. It's just a nice little bit of floral and grassy quality around the kind of the front curve of the tongue. Let's put the rest of the beer actually in the glass and just check that there's no sediment and things like that. Yeah, no, pretty clear beer, this one. I think it has, yes, pretty much the same level of has this pretty much the same level of opacity, clarity, whatever you want to say, as it did before. But yeah, fruity side of things then. Yeah, I mean, it's as I always say, you get the fruity esters and that little oily bubble behind the front curve of your tongue. Around the front curve of your palate, it's quite light and grassy, but the fruit is pretty kind of straight up in this one. I mean, it's if you go towards the back of your palate there, you might get a little hint of like a grapefruity, kind of passion fruity note out of this one, but as you come further forward, it's a little bit more kind of like mangoes. You will get a little bit of a kind of apricot, like there is a wee touch of an almost apricot-y note to this one. Then as you come right towards the front part of the palate, you start to get a little bit of a kind of lemon limey kind of quality in there. I'd really be curious to know what hops they've used in this. It doesn't say on the Stigbergets website, of course, but I think I was wrong when it comes to saying mosaic was in this one. I'm pretty sure there's not really much of an orangey, tangerine quality to this one, so I don't think there's mosaic in here, and it doesn't have that little bit of earthiness that you would always expect from that hop either. And I don't think it's quite complex enough to be Citra either, and usually it's one of those two hops paired with something else that you'll find in IPAs these days, so I'm really not quite sure. But as I say, fruitiness, little bit of passion fruit, little bit of mangoes kind of in front of that. You do start to get an apricot note going further forward, and there's almost just a little bit of a slightly limey quality behind the front curve of the palate as well. But I mean, overall, this beer, in terms of flavour, like I say, I would stick to the premise that this one is a little bit more West Coasty in its flavour profile, but it really kind of sticks to that that lower level bitterness that you would expect of a New England IPA. I mean, I think it maybe is fair to say that this is a Swedish West Coast IPA. I think that's probably where this category where it would fit in, what category it would fit into actually, because it kind of reminds me, I think this one, it really reminds me a little bit of being a more amped up version of their West Coast IPA that they do. I think that's probably a fair kind of assessment of this one. So yeah, if you like the West Coast IPA but you want something a little bit heavier, then Lumor is a good place to go actually. But I like this one, definitely a sipper rather than a sessioner though this. If you want a more sessionable beer, get Amazing Haze or something like that. Or of course you can get Narangi from OO Brewing as well, which was produced around the same time as the GBG Beer Week and things like that. So yeah, an interesting beer, this one. I would say that this one isn't quite as complex as some of the other ones that you're going to get from Stigbergets. It's a little bit more old school, this, and by old school we're talking, 2016, 2017. There's constantly new hops and things coming out, so it's fair to say that this one isn't the most complex beer that you're going to find from Stigbergets, but it's very solid, and you can't really fault them for anything with this. It is just a little bit more old school than some of their other beers that they've put out, I would say. In terms of the mouthfeel to this beer then, Yeah, it's... I would say that this beer is mid-bodied. Carbonation is very smooth, really leans towards the oily side of things in terms of its mouthfeel. Bitterness-wise, I think I think you're lucky to get 30 IBUs out of this, to be honest. I really think that 30 would be quite generous to say about this beer. So yeah, 30 IBUs. Good balance of kind of smoothness and sweetness in the malt base. I would say that it leans more towards the biscuity side of things than that kind of pale malty bready type thing though. And there's a good little bit of a fruity quality. And the fruity notes in this beer, I would say, are a little bit more oily than they are juicy. And that sort of suits the biscuity, boozy backbone that this beer has. So yeah, more of an oily IPA, this one. I think it's fair to describe this one as an amped up version, if you like, of the West Coast IPA, or West Coast, I forget if it's a West Coast IPA or West Coast Paleo, that beer is, the one with the seagull on it. But yeah, it's a nice beer, this one, a little bit more old school, and it's cool to see them kind of experimenting a little bit, and of course slightly, you know, playing around with old recipes and stuff like that. But it gets a thumbs up from me. And I'm sure, you know, I would drink this again. I would have a little taster of this though, rather than a full can, I would think. But that's just how I do beer these days. So yeah, let's leave it at that for this one. The Lumor Imperial IPA at 9% from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg here in Sweden. Another quite solid beer from Stigbergets. A little bit more old school, this one. And if you enjoyed the West Coast IPA but want something a little bit more amped up, then do check this one out. So yeah, let's leave it at that. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Stigbergets Bryggeri as well, and I'm sure that I'll return to these guys at some point in the fairly near future. They've always got new beers coming out. Until the next time, it's Slangy just now, and I'll catch you guys later. Make sure you check out my social media, and make sure you check out some of these Stigbergets beers. The Lumor Imperial IPA at 9% ABV from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg here in Sweden. Slange, skål, cheers.